Hey, welcome back to the 180 podcast. This is Nick, your awesome host. How you doing, my other awesome co-host?
Hi, this is Paul, the other awesome co-host.
Um, so Paul, we are having a guest today to speak about tech. Are you excited?
I'm very excited.
Okay, so
Why don't you, Nick? Why don't you tell us the theme of today's show today?
for sure. So, you know, as a young person, right, I tinker with tech a lot. And I know maybe that's not the case for everyone, especially when it usually comes to nonprofit organizations, right? When you think of nonprofit organizations, you usually don't associate with like technology or modern, advanced, those kind of things. But I think it's changing. But I think that's changing because, especially when we're in a pandemic, we rely on tech a lot. There's this Zoom video call and everything. So I think it's will be very fun and educational as well for our listeners out there to have another perspective of how we can utilize and take advantage of tech in our life. What's your thoughts,
Yeah,
Paul?
yeah. So I brought this up and I invited our guest today because I've learned a lot in tech about technology in my new role, well, newish role from the job that I've had the last couple of years compared to my first jobs coming out of university. So I just thought it's a good idea for especially today with young people just to understand the technology sector and the culture and how much it influences our society. You look at the recent stock market, you can see a lot of the money coming into the markets is technology companies, and there's a reason for that. It's a lot of them are game changers in terms of the way we live, in terms of our accessibility to data, to capabilities that I think are so far different than 50 years ago and the leaps we were making then. So that's why I reached out to one of my friends, my dear friends. I think a lot of people on the show happened to be my dear friends. Um, Felipe Gasparino. So Felipe is alumni of our rover crew. He's from Sao Paulo, Brazil, if I remember correctly. Never had any scouting experience, even though scouting is quite big in Brazil and in certain areas. Joined us about 8 years ago, and he was a cub leader volunteering with me with kids age 8 to 10 years old. Thank you, Felipe, for all those years that we were together working in those camps and every week in downtown Vancouver working with these kids. Uh, right now, he's a director of product at a local tech company, which I'll have him speak more to later. And I think he's been with them for over 8 years now. So he has lots of experience in the technology sector here in Vancouver. And a personal note, he is a lover of French fries and ice cream. Um, as we always joke, there's always room for both of those things. So without further ado, our guest Nick, Felipe, welcome, Felipe.
All right, thanks, guys. Yeah, I mean, I'm super excited to be here. And, I think talking about technology is something that is exciting to me as I'm super passionate about it.
Mm.
The whole field I've known my entire life since, I was 10, building computers in my room and exploring different software, trying to install different things and just really learn what you can do with technology. Now, totally different than back then. But yeah, it's exciting to talk about tech. Huge, um, the amount of impact that technology will bring in the next years and has brought so far is incredible. So
Yeah, so why don't you start with how'd you get to Vancouver from Brazil? Maybe how your life was before, and kind of tells your journey to get to this point here.
yeah. Um, well, as I mentioned, so I started early in the tech field. I was always passionate about it, and I decided to. In Brazil, we do have technical high school, so it's a bit different than what it would be. It's sort of a college in Canada. So I did take a technical high school that was focused on computer science. So there we learned about analysis, different programming languages, but What's interesting about tech is there's so much about self-thought. You just go through different, um, tutorials, and it's just so easy to just give it a try compared to, if you compare it to the medical um, department, it's not as easy. You just don't
Yeah.
get to explore as much. Where technology, it's so easy. You can get started with anything. You have a computer, these days you have an iPad, you can start coding, right? So yeah, like for me was starting in by myself, learning a lot through my passion, really. um, and taking this technical high school really helped me to get a job in the field. So I started working at the age of 14. I actually was working as IT tech then. Then I managed to find a job at the same company. I was always sneaking in and finding my way through the software factory and making some connections there. So eventually, I took some courses in the language that they use. So I managed to find a position there, and that's where I started to see more. It was my first experience in development in the field. um, yeah, but I mean, shortly after, making connections with people, which is quite interesting, um, I was brought to a different company. And those companies, this is back in Brazil, they were they were consultant companies. So it's just working for banks, which is quite a unique style of development. Working for a consultant software company, to me, what I find is you don't get to own much of the product. And it is a lot of just making sure that you're interacting well with the clients. And I mean, that was sort of an interesting experience to me, but it wasn't as exciting when I think of tech.
Yeah.
So that goes to like, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that, because I'm in healthcare now, I'm doing product implementation. And, those traditional industries, they are just struggling to keep up, right? So when you're
Right.
a consultant and you're like, you want to be super innovative, they're like, no, we just want to use Microsoft Excel better. Like it's different than what maybe as a software developer you think as a forefront of technology when you're consulting for a company that is a lot slower, so they can't move as quickly as maybe you want to, or the tech sector wants to. So I can definitely
Yeah.
relate to working in that type of environment.
Yeah, and I mean, and that comes in sort of the transition to Canada, because when I moved, so that was back 2012.
Hmm.
I was in the transition. Should I go to university, or should I have an experience abroad? I decided to go abroad, and actually, the plan initially was to study 4 months English and then work 4 months.
Hmm.
It turned out into this whole story of moving to Canada and staying
eight
at the
years
same
later.
company. eight
Yeah.
years later, yeah. But yeah, that was the initial plan. And I mean, you know such a mind-opening experience to move to a different place that you don't speak the language, and culturally it's just so different, right? So that was a very mind-opening experience to me. I think at the age of 19 that I was back at 2012, I'm so grateful that I went through that. And I think that helped shape who I am. I was able to really get sort of the best of the different cultures. I think evaluate what do I like from culture back home in Brazil, and then get from this new culture of Canada. Um, and yeah, I mean, that was interesting the way that I actually got the job, because um, I found my job on Craigslist. I was,
Oh,
What?
interesting.
Craigslist?
my, yeah. So it turns out that it was at a point, I think out of the 3 months, my English was still very broken and very difficult for me to understand people. But my uncle was pushing me to sort of get started, build a resume, send it out. And I found this startup that was building an intranet, which is a application for companies, like a platform
Yeah.
to engage
Similar to Basecamp, what we use.
employees. Yeah, similar to Basecamp. Um, and then I decided to go for interview. I remember they messaged me, yeah, we're ready. It was near my school. I was like, I'm not wearing any proper clothes. I mean, I'm just wearing my regular school clothes. I'm not sure if I should go, but as a startup, it's just um, very casual, right? They were like, yeah, just come in. The company was super small. There were 7 employees back then. So I was interviewed by all the 7 employees at the same time, which is, for my first interview in English, that was pretty,
Really
Yeah.
intense. I mean, one
pretty
versus 7.
intense.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
even if
yeah, that
you know
was.
English, even if you know English, it's really intense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was at different times, but I think at some point, like maybe at some point it was everyone, but the technical one, it was all the developers at the same time. So, there was a whiteboard exercise and everything. That was a little bit stressful. Um, but I'm really glad I actually went through that challenge, then managed to find a position at that startup as a junior developer.
So you were able to
Yeah.
pass. So you were able to pass that initial technical and just overall interview with just like what you had learned through your technical college, which isn't exactly a university, but it's not exactly high school, and also just some work experience over the last 6 years. Like what what really helped you with that technical interview? I'm interested because you're coming in as a 20-year-old or 19-year-old, getting a job as like a junior developer without any kind of formal like what we would consider formal education here, right? What was the uh, training that you got that best helped for that interview? I'm curious.
I think it was definitely helpful to have the experience. I think having the experience in the field really shows to companies that you have seen similar things before. And it shows that you know how to interact with the workspace, which is sometimes different than school, right? Like you can be sometimes, not always, but sometimes you can be very successful at school. But when you are in the work field, you might struggle depending on the dynamics of that environment. So I think what was interesting to that interview was sharing my experiences of working on different projects. I remember the CEO asking questions like, what did you like about that experience? And I was just being quite honest that the working on the projects and focus on what the results were. And I think I'm not being specific here because it's been so long, but I just
Yeah.
have that memory. But I remember that sharing the specifics back then really helped to connect with the people in the interview. And they just know it's real compared to just maybe an experience that you have on building projects with your schoolmates, right? So I mean, that's what I even today when I'm interviewing people or I'm talking to people, I find that having our own projects, actually, which is another thing. Like back then, I worked for all these different companies, but I did have my own side projects, which is where I learned probably the most because I was curious about implementing those
The
things.
coding part of it.
And
UX.
you are doing on your own. When you're working with a big, consultant company, you are reusing a lot of what's already there. You are not always building by yourself. So the experience of working on your own side projects and having that passion and learning through, building something from scratch is really, really, really useful.
For our listener, highlight this part. You want to replay this part a lot.
Yeah, I think that part of and you know what, the great thing about these, just a side note, like I think Felipe, we've known each other for the same 8 years, so I remember your broken English, which was actually pretty good. The best moments for me was like when we ever had to explain like metaphors and like local slang. Like those are always, I always remember those moments because you were always so inquisitive, and we would laugh at each other. Okay, we wouldn't laugh at you, but with our group, we would laugh. It would be really funny, and I think that's helped you be successful as well. You've just been super curious and not fearful of what people think. You just ask a question if you don't know, and you apply those knowledge to other things you do.
Yeah. I mean, on that note, I find that getting involved with the crew was so helpful
Hmm.
for me to connect with locals, right? I mean, it was coming. I'm sort of jumping here a little bit, but that came out of what you mentioned. Because to
Yeah.
me, you know, when I was working at Jolso already, it's a field. Generally, the tech field is quite. Sometimes you're just connecting a lot with machines. Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not in all environments that you are connecting with people.
Yeah.
So for me, coming in a different place, that was not always the best environment to be connecting with people. So
Yeah,
the
like
crew,
socially, technical
yeah,
stuff was more critical, I guess, at the time. Yeah.
yeah, the social. That's a great way of putting it. So yeah, the crew is a great way to getting involved in a different environment and in a more social where I could learn different stories, I could learn different things outside that
Yeah.
tech work,
So
and bring some of the things from the tech world to the crew.
yeah. So why don't we talk about that a little parallel? So you started your career here. It became a full time job, I guess, not a 4-month thing. So you continued to work, you continued to go to school a little bit, and then you also joined the crew. So maybe tell us a little bit about how you found out about the crew and what made you join, and kind of what, like, yeah, like you said, like what was kind of the, I would say benefits, but kind of like what you got out of it in those
Hmm.
years.
Yeah. I mean, I found the crew through a meetup event. I
Yeah.
actually met the other Nick person. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, it was with him and Kevin as well. It was just a design. At the time I was trying to socialize, so I was going
Hmm.
out through meetup events. When I found an opportunity with things that I was in a way connected to, I felt like, okay, this is a way that I can meet people. And yeah, I met them at that event. They mentioned about the crew. That was one of those dinners, and I was like, oh great, well that sounds interesting. And I what what really stuck to me in terms of the crew was the impact, the mission of trying to help people, trying to make leave a better place. And that really connected with me. And the whole felt so welcoming, the environment, and it was just a perfect fit for me back then. So grateful that you guys welcome me from with the broken English and all the struggles. um
You always had candy too, Nick, by the way. Felipe always had candy, so it made it easier.
Oh,
right,
okay. Okay.
that's the real advice here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think what looking back, and that realization came only a few years after. I think the crew was so focused on project management, which is a skill that is super important. I mean, I've always been organized and focused on results and things to be done nicely, and I think the crew really showed many different tools to me that I wasn't necessarily exposed to before. I remember actually, let's make it personal. I remember Paul in one of our workshops actually writing down on the whiteboard talking about project management. You know, one of the rules or one of the good advices are to look at the timeline backwards, right? So that's something that stuck with me, and I'm sure there are many others that I just internalized by going through that exercise, not only through the regular workshops, which is a more sort of traditional
Formal way of
teaching,
teaching. Yeah.
Yeah.
but actually from the doing, right? From let's the PDPs. That was so great. That sort of mentorship and talking about personal development. It's something I've. It was so. It really connected with me. I've read books about personal development since like at very early ages.
Hmm.
My mom is a psychologist now, and
Mm.
that was something in our family that was always something that I took from her. And you know the PDPs were a great way of getting exposed to different ways of doing it, the 101s. And yeah, so I mean, I
Personal
think,
development plans, in case people. Yeah.
thank you.
Acronyms tech, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I think there's a lot about, I guess, to summarize, there's, well, friendship and all the connections, which are so memorable, definitely highlight project management and
Mm.
experiencing not only learning through different techniques and experiencing it, and I think the mentorship and like different ways of managing that. I think that's the main highlights I would think from the crew.
Yeah, awesome. I think now the question that I have a lot of questions in my mind, sorry. But right now, I guess the thing that I want to ask the most is that so we kind of know about that, the things that you took from the crew and everything, right? So right now, how are you applying, like, are you applying any of those things into your current work right now? Actually, what are you doing right now, right? What are you doing now? What's your company? What's your profession? Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, in terms of the progression on, when I took that opportunity as junior developer, we really grew as a company after that. And I've been transitioning into more advanced projects. So I was leading our mobile application, that was 2014, that was mobile, when mobile was getting stronger. So I led that project. I got the opportunity to actually lead a few other developers. After the first stages of the app, we needed more people. So it was my first experience actually leading others.
Mhm.
And since then, it was continuing on that transition of leading more developers. Right now I'm wearing many different hats actually. Um, but it's sort of a mix of leading developers. Now I'm actually leading team leads on our dev team, which is an interesting set of skills. When you're actually leading other people, there's all the connection that you're making with them and making sure that you are bringing that impact and finding the best out of the company's needs with the personal needs of every employee and finding a good, sort of balance between that. And I've been quite involved in sort of more the technical parts of things. So taking care of the architecture of our product, more recently doing a lot of product management, making sure that we're building not only the right way with the right architecture, but also making sure that we're doing the right thing. Because, there's no point in build something for the sake of building. We want to build something that is successful. So there is a lot of that, of making sure, that we are analyzing our data and we're heading in the right direction. So I mean, in that capacity at Jostler today, that's mainly what I'm doing, managing teams, sort of transitioning from the technical to a more administration and business side of the company.
Okay.
Yeah, and in terms of what I use from the crew, as I mentioned, I think the project management is something I took from my life in general.
Yeah.
I think that memory I took from Paul, it's something that is actually in my mind. And
Hardwired
when I'm
now.
working on
Yeah.
projects, when I work on projects, it's just something that you don't even notice anymore. So yes, I think I do use in my day to day, not only on projects that are related to Jostle, but also my side projects. Throughout the years, I've been also involved in other projects on the side. I remember attending Startup Weekend in one of those years and seeing how, it's sort of a different project management because everything is falling apart in those 48 hours and you need to try picking the best. So, I think there is a lot of, it's even hard to pinpoint what you're using because it just has been over the years. But
Okay.
definitely related to project management.
And how many people are at Jocelyn now? So you're employee 8 then technically. So how many people have?
We are over 70 now. I don't know the exact numbers 'cause we change a little bit here and there, but yeah, I mean we really grew quite a lot, and the whole transition, it was, it's been almost 9 years now at the company, and it just changes so much when you cross different numbers of employees. In the early times that we were working, it seemed like we were faster. As you start to add more people, then it becomes, we need to make sure that everyone is sort of on the same page. And then our communication changes, the way that we do things, we need to start thinking more. We do really think as a big company, like we try to find processes and things that will scale. We don't just try to do, as you mentioned, just throw that Excel. Like we try to, when we're working on things, and that's a big learning on my end too over the years, is when you are doing something for the company, it might seem cheap to take that approach, but if you're maintaining something, you're maintaining for many years, and then that maintenance, maybe not investing a little bit more now will cost so much more over the years, right? So, that's sort of something we have as our um, mindset, is to try thinking of the projects in a more long term, and it's sort of a balance. I think we also want to keep things agile, otherwise we don't move. So it's definitely finding that balance between putting something out there and making something either internally or to our product and customers, but also making sure that we're not having to just change too often where you can't really make impact.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when our group was 20 people, and then we became 100 people, and then we became 150 people, and then we became 100 people, and then we became 50 people. So, yeah, it's a totally, it's different. I wouldn't say it's better or worse, because sometimes I think in a startup there are hard times. Like I work in a small company, and you have so many hats, and then you get a bigger, and you think you're gonna get less hats, but then if you're a senior person, you realize you have to create hats that didn't have to exist before, right?
Yeah.
So it's definitely been a challenge, and it's good to see you kind of have that progression, and yeah, it's been really cool to see, kind of hear from you now versus like when you started, because it's weird because I feel like I heard who you were before in terms of your job, right? Because it's been the same job, but we've talked about it in different times through your life and career, and it's interesting to hear you talk about building stuff with purpose, because I remember like when we were younger, like you're all about building like just technology, just build it out there, like and technology is number one. And then now to hear you kind of say, kind of think about what we're building and make sure it's the right thing, it's quite a difference from me to hear from you.
Right. Should we talk about QR codes?
Yeah, side story, me and Felipe had a debate about QR codes for like an hour at a Denny's. Wasn't it?
What about
think
QR code?
so.
Are you thinking about QR code to pay for Denny's or something?
No, well, I think back then we were working on a project for a flyer.
A crew flyer, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, crew flyer, and I was thinking, let's just put a QR code. So, if people want to go to the website, they don't need to go and type it; they can use it. And yeah, that was the whole discussion: should we use it or not? I don't think we used it at the end.
I never got to use it.
I think at the time, okay. I think at the time, I don't think social media was as big for sure. But I think websites were bigger, maybe. And we had a very simple website, pcrollers.com. The QR, my biggest thing with the QR codes back then was you needed an app to activate the site.
That's true.
It was app exclusive. Today, it's just your camera, which is brilliant. I thought that's brilliant. That's a game-changing game-changing feature ad for the industry, because then anyone can access. The problem with it before was only
download the app. Yeah.
Only the leading people like Felipe would have a QR code reader app, right? I had a QR code reader app, but I never used it because this is again side topic. We'll cut this out if we need to. One of my biggest issues was I don't need to scan the barcode of this product to compare it on Amazon. I just know what the product is. So like the user story for the QR codes to read barcodes at the time didn't really make sense to me. It was a really poorly put together proposition. So for us to have a QR code, and the people who would have it are super like leading tech people who want to scan, UPC codes on their products. Like, how does that align with like youth development go here? Like the type of people we had. But that's, I don't know if you have any comments. How's that development? Has that changed your look on QR codes these last couple of years?
Yeah, I know we were talking about QR code. I think, that was a feature that it was too ahead of its time when we were discussing back then. That was now a different opportunity to use it in.
And that's everywhere. Honestly, that's everywhere.
We see from the different restaurants, and it's really everywhere now.
Interesting.
If
So
only I had, you know, I saw, but I didn't quite connect everything back then, you know.
Go ahead, Nick.
yeah, thank you. Finally. But anyway, moving forward, we heard about what you're doing, right? And so you start out with just putting it out there, just building technology and everything. Now you're in more of a state of we have to build things with intention, with the right intention. We have to do things the right way, stuff like that. And I think that's a long journey, and I think you have learned a lot, right? What would you say for young people nowadays, like myself, for example, right? What are some technology trends that we should know and should be aware of? Like, if we were to be more involved or be more aware in the technology field.
Ooh, tough question. You know, I think probably wearables are going to be taking over more and more in the next couple of years.
Hmm.
You know, I
Interesting.
think I mean, in my opinion, is in terms of interaction. So coding for young people, I think coding is so important. Coding on newer technologies, if you're interested, right, on coding. But I think that these new wearables are going to be a great side of the industry, and it will build new ways for us to connect with technology, because today it's very focused on our phones. Now more and more with Apple watches and all the different smart watches and smart bands. How long is it going to take for smart glasses to be actually usable? I'm not talking Google Glass that was sort of a prototype 10 years ago, but actual products and ways that we can connect. And I think from now, that will be a trend that will continue to go up, I think.
Yeah. I did not really expect the answer, but now that you mentioned it, I think I know I think it might be really accurate. Right? I saw so that you mentioned smartwatches, smart bands, right, that measure your heart rate, that measure your calories intake, outtake. Now we will have like the Oura ring, right, to track your sleep cycle, right? If you're sleeping healthily, if you have deep sleep, light sleep, stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And maybe who knows, right? We have.
Well, I mean, I guess to evolve a little bit more from what I mentioned, I think it's the smartification of things.
Mm,
Are either, what we're wearing, but we're seeing more with cars being smarter. Everything is sort of turning smarter from now on. And
yeah.
as we can control from our voice assistants, we can control from our phones and whatever device we're using. I think we're going to have a lot more of that control. So, I mean, if you're interested in sort of stay relevant in that area, I think, coding and being connected with technology in general will be a good field.
So, so you mentioned wearables and smartification, which I totally agree with. Like, I have a bunch of smart lights as well. And, I just actually had the hot water boiler on, and I wish I could just tell Google to turn off the hot water boiler because it keeps it boiling. I'm over here, it's making noise over there. I wish I could just tell it to not be on. How do you think that idea is permeating into your current company's industry in terms of like productivity and like because Jostle's a intranet, so intranet is kind of like a work like an or enterprise level productivity tool, right? Communication tool. Is
Mhm.
that seeing a lot of new development? Like I would just imagine I can because I'm in a public sector. It's a bit different, right? Like just like maybe your
Mm.
iPhone telling you, or your smartwatch telling you certain meetings, or collecting certain data. Like what's going on in the enterprise level in terms of innovation and technology that maybe is different than say consumer level.
Right.
That's more
Um,
hard hitting director product question.
yeah, I mean, especially with coronavirus, right, and what's actually heading in remote working and the need for software, there is definitely a new demand. It was always heading that direction, I
Mhm.
think, um, but the need of working from home really pushed that to be a much faster change. So some companies that didn't really think about using a platform or didn't use as much, now they have to. So I mean, there was a big boom in terms of need for that. In terms of that smart section, I think, I think there was an article about Microsoft and how they were opening up their internal information about the users to the company. And I think that that's sort of around that theme of, when you are in a company, you do have people that are running the company. So you have the leaders, and you have people that are on the logistics side. There's a lot of requests from those people that they want to know how the company is using, right? But that's a very tricky territory because it taps into privacy, and I don't think that anyone is really ready to talk about privacy in a way that, do we know what's right and what's sort of, from an ethic point of view, good for the company to know or not good for the company to know. So it's, I think that the smart side are reports. I think there are reports that the company wants to know, how does this software help my company to be productive? How does these different tools, even from a business point of view, there are so many tools on product management, right? And they are sort of giving you reports that will help you become more successful and help you shape the product. So I think that on the business side, there's a lot of those reports and sort of reading the data and giving you information that is useful for you to act on. But it's a very tricky and very difficult business because, I mean, if you're looking at the data from the wrong point of view, you might just be giving wrong reports. So it's tricky, but I think that's probably the direction that the softwares in the business side will evolve.
Yeah, I remember when I first got into the technology space, I guess, they always say people, process, and then technology. Like, you have to get the people on side. You have to get the processes on side before the technology being on side will help you become optimized, right? If you forget about the people and you only worry about the process and technology, you'll be surprised how many people don't want to fill in certain reports, how many people will try to ignore the process because they can, right? And if you ignore the process, you just got a bunch of people with really great tech that isn't really following through with what the business requirements are. So it's interesting you say that. And I think it does correlate with a lot of things that are going on. I'll give you an example from our crew point of view, which we're doing. So all our meetings are now on Zoom because we're doing no contact scouting, no contact volunteering, really.
Yeah,
Right.
pretty safe.
And one of the things that we noticed, and one of the things we tried to do at the beginning of this year was to estimate or evaluate, not necessarily evaluate, but that's how reports usually come out, right? They come out as a evaluation, even though it's only meant to be reporting the data, right? Depending on how you position it, people might think, well, this is how I'm being evaluated. Well, no, it's just the data, it's just the information that's available. So we tried to be more intentional in where our adult volunteers spend their time. And it was a lot easier now because all our meetings, conversations, including this podcast, are off of our Zoom account. So with Zoom, we can track all the meeting titles, all the participants, how long they've logged in, when did they log in, right? And then we can take that data and you can find out which volunteers or scouters, as you know, has spent the most time with the most rovers, right? And that's just insight we would never have had before, right? Like, you don't know where your volunteers, like they call them, they text them, you can't track that stuff, but definitely we're doing group Zoom meetings. We are now getting that data. And now I'm tasked with like doing something with it or not doing something with it.
Definitely
But it's a problem.
do something with it.
But it's something that we didn't have before, right? And now because, like you said, now we're all working from home or it's virtual, this data has all of a sudden become available. And then you got to be very careful with how you do it, because we always say volunteers don't get paid, but people are spending more hours and other people are spending less hours. So you got to ask yourself, are we spending our time in where it needs to be? That's been our biggest question. And ultimately, if you report it the wrong way or position the wrong way, the people are the most affected by those conversations at the end of the day. So That's what we've seen. And
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example of how, yeah, that data can be useful. I mean, then what you do with that data is also a
mhm.
different story. But I guess just like another example, it's quite, we all use maybe hundreds of software, and there are so many hooks that we don't even
Yeah,
notice that are out there. And what I mean by hooks is that people are, hopefully in a more anonymous form, they are tracking how that software is being used, not for evil, again, hopefully. They are doing for deciding what you build next, which
yeah,
feature was more successful. When
mhm.
you put a product out there, you definitely want to see, out of all your 100 users, which ones are using this versus that. And that's just another example in terms of quite relatable in terms of tech and in terms of those reports that will continue to grow.
Yeah. Okay, let's pivot or a little bit pivot, yeah. So, like as most of our target audience is younger people, maybe they've graduated, maybe they've not. If they're interested in tech, like Nick is, what do you think is the best way for young people to get into the tech industry in Vancouver, maybe specifically, and how and I'm talking about like in education because I think you took a very unique education path, whereas there's kind of this standard or set expectation for people to go through certain
Mhm.
levels of schooling or bachelor's degree. We debated that too. I remember back in the day. Like, what have you seen as like in terms of the tech industry, the people you've interacted with? How is the best way for the young people to get involved? And what have you seen as characteristics of the more successful developers or product managers?
Yeah, I mean, the tech industry in general is quite open, right? So, in terms of development and product development, there has been many schools that are boot camps that are
Hmm.
very enriching, not only from what they're teaching there, but also the connections that you're making with others and just the projects you're building. Like, to me, I'm a big believer that you learn by doing those projects, right? A lot of those boot camps, they will have sort of a final project where you get started and you actually put into action what you've learned in the course. So I think, to me, like, that's quite an interesting way. But more specifically in development, it's hard to compare someone taking a boot camp of, let's say, three to 6 months. It depends on how intense those are, compared to someone that spent 4 years in university. The skills are going to be different. So, or someone that took a boot camp but were already doing work on their end. So I mean, it's a very hard question to me to actually answer, but I'd say, more than say go one path, find your path. You can go on a boot camp if that's if you are quite hands-on and you'd like to get an idea what that's like. Taking university is more a standard path. I think either path you take, I would really recommend to have your own side projects, to do your own research. School, either boot camp or university, won't get you out with all the skills you need. You really will learn by experiencing it. And I think, in school, I'm seeing a lot boot camp less school. There's a lot of projects that are sort of pre-built. So you get resumes with everyone has the same project, right? And then when you actually dive in, as when I'm interviewing people, the project is quite interesting, but a lot of the skeleton of the project was already given to the person. So, sometimes they don't even understand how things were connected. So to me, is to stay curious and actually start things from scratch would be my advice. Regardless of the path you take, try applying what you learned in your passion. If your passion is drinking, if your passion is playing a specific sport, is there an opportunity to build something out of it or to learn something? um, it doesn't matter if it won't be used necessarily, but at least you are getting some action and you are trying things here and there. And you can actually show those things to, not only show those things, but you can show the experience of going through that journey
Yeah.
in interviews, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think I can really relate to this. Like I'm really I would say I'm an enthusiast, I think, when it comes to technology and everything, and like tinkering around with it. My major is in like business and marketing though. But like for myself, I do pick up side projects on my own, right? Most of them are from the crew, like managing the social media accounts, writing blog, writing articles, doing this podcast, and trying to promote it and trying to grow it. And I think it's actually really valuable in terms of I learned a bunch of theories and and of course there's some execution in the course programs in the university as well, right? But now that I get more chances to apply those knowledge and those things I learned from the marketing course and the business course, right? I think it helped me get a better picture of uh, of where my skills are at and what I need moving forward, right? And I, it's fascinating that you mentioned about doing side projects. Is that what you look for when you are hiring someone, right? Because I think I heard that you manage a team of people, and you maybe you're interviewing them as well, right? Is side project something that you look in the resume, the portfolio of someone who's you are interviewing?
Yeah. I mean, I think all those things you mentioned there like are super valuable, right? Like you're
Yeah.
putting yourself out there and you're being active. You're not there is about being sort of passive about the skills that you're learning or being active and learning about yourself as well, not only about the skills. In terms of the question of side projects and interviews, definitely. I've interviewed many students for co-ops. I've interviewed many developers for Jostle, and I'm always trying to find how keen the person is on applying the skills that the person took in different environments. That might be, volunteering at the crew. That's definitely something that you are putting your skills into action, right? Um, the side projects is a way of it's a cheap way of doing that and a nice way of visualizing it to others. So yeah, I look for side projects. I look for things that are extra from the regular school projects and things that they are forced to be. Because I mean, to me, I like to work with people that share that passion. They are having fun doing their work, and I think to me, a way of validating that is if they are spending their own time with those projects, right? Because I mean, you can say, "Oh, I'm quite passionate about technology," but you never really think about projects, or you never really expose yourself, and you don't use your time towards it at all, unless you are, forced to by school or forced to by your employer because they are paying you. Then, how passionate are you really about technology? So to me, that's it's not the only thing, but it's definitely an indicator of, okay, this person is really keen. This person really enjoy what they're doing.
Yeah, that's great. That's I think that's a great way to explain that whole like situational behavioral like answer in interviews, because you should use an example. And when people are saying they like or are skilled at certain things, they have to be able to tell you, where, why, like give us a real story, kind of like what you were saying when you were first got that job interview, right? You're telling people real stories, what happened to you, and they could probably sense the passion. And probably you see it now, right? You can sense the passion, you can sense the realism, you can sense that even if they don't know what they're doing now, that they will work hard to learn what they need to know to get the job done. Because with technology, what, maybe the skill that you need, you don't even know yet, right? Because
Yeah.
next year could have
Totally.
been a
Yeah.
new coding language, but if you've done coding languages, a new one shouldn't be a problem.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, that's very well said. One of the skills that we need to evaluate in terms of a good developer is their skills in learning new skill, right? Not only about what they have. Of course, the experience brings a lot with,
Mm.
over the years, they will be able to pinpoint a few things that maybe others didn't. But yeah, as you said, if you pick any strong developer in terms of 5 years, they might be working with totally different technologies from one to the other extreme. maybe even few transitions in those years.
Yeah. So speaking of, I guess side projects. I mean, this is now a lead in for us. I remember you mentioned to me last time we spoke at our friend's party that I guess is now not relevant based on her current IG posts. Um, are you're working on some side projects yourself? I mean, things. I mean, are you still keeping that idea true to yourself too, right? In terms of having a place to play, a place to be creative. So, are there any projects that you're working on, and then what can you tell us anything about it?
Yeah, I mean, definitely with, as more responsibilities at Jostle, that was more difficult to, invest the time for side projects, but it's something I always been looking out for. Projects like, when I think of side projects, to me are things that are opportunities, frustrations that you experience throughout your day, things that maybe you are well positioned to. So I'm always thinking about possible ideas. And so I'm currently taking a few months off work, actually. I decided to, come to Portugal. My mom lives in Portugal, and this is her office, actually. So I decided to come here for a bit of a break. And, that's definitely something I've been connecting to, that sort of side project. Yeah, I mean, I'm just different apps. I can't really say much about it in terms of specifics because the scope is quite wide at this stage. I'm still iterating and trying to find how I'm positioning, but I'm working on a project related to questions and see how we as a product can help people have conversations with others and themselves through this question. So help bring insights and just have a bit of a conversation that will lead to something that maybe they were not aware of. So the scope is quite open right now, but yeah, that's one of the side projects I'm working on, more related to helping sort of mind support and sort of social around that field.
Mental health, psychology,
Mental health, yeah.
I guess it's good to have your mom around there to give you some.
Well,
tips?
definitely, yeah. That's something we've been working on. It's not, not running out of ideas, to be honest.
for sure.
we we've been talking about mental health, and for she changed career a couple years, 3 years ago, and there's so much that I'm getting exposed to in the mental health that are great opportunities. And we're thinking about, okay, what can we build? How can we help people? And it's just interesting how, it really requires, there's something in terms of side project to build something out there. There's something about, creating like a successful, I mean, it depends on what success is, of course, but if you're talking about building an app where you have a higher exposure, then it definitely requires that deeper thinking. And yeah, it's just a lot of work that you don't really estimate until you start building. It's not just start building. You need to do all the proper assessment of how is the market, what are people doing, what's already here. It's a bit of a process. I think it's a bit of what you were saying more in the beginning of the podcast of, me just having that eager to just let's build this versus now I'm like, okay, well, is there a value here really? How are people using this? Would people use this? If there is a competitor, why are they not using, right? So there's all those analysis that are going through my head now, even before. And honestly, I need to even maybe be careful about all those things that I'm adding, because if I add all those layers, you just don't build anything. So I feel like it's finding that balance. It's so important of, yes, maybe this is not the most perfect project. And there are many things that we're going to find out as we go through this project, rather than just, wait until it's perfect before you build. So it's definitely a balance here.
Yeah, I hope I'm not killing your enthusiasm with old age cynicism. And
It's all you, Paul. It's all you, Paul.
That's why I'm here, right?
Hey.
Bring the young energy here.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, we need you, Nick.
That's why we are balanced. And that's kind of why I do like agile, because it's a balance, right? Agile, there is planning, but there's not so much planning, and it doesn't stop you at your tracks, right? You can start with something small. That's all it's really telling you to do, and as long as you keep it that way, and you're getting good feedback, then sure. But I think, yeah, building out a multi-million-dollar project without getting feedback, or even in your case, like mental health, right? Mental health is quite sensitive subject, and it can be a very, just like our mentoring, right? Like just like even interacting with people at that level of mental health support. Um, you're playing with fire sometimes, and you have to do the right due diligence, even not for your own sake, but for the people who are affected, who can be affected. And then we've seen a lot of that, especially here in 2020, with
Mhm.
everything that's been going on. So that's cool to hear you're working on a more passionate, but also a more like a sociable, like a social impact type of a project as well.
By the way, your mom
Yeah,
has
yeah.
really nice office.
Tell her
Yeah.
that.
All right. So we've been through the whole journey, right? We learned about your past, your present, kind of future moving forward, the technology trends and everything. I guess it's finally time to ask the golden question of this podcast, which
Golden
we ask
question.
every guest.
Okay.
What would be the one advice that you would give to your younger self, or someone like me who are in late teens, early 20s?
Yeah, I mean that's in terms of what it's really, I find that sometimes it's hard to pinpoint what you would have changed because it's so much about our own journey, right? Would you have changed something if you knew something before, would you actually have changed, or you wouldn't have learned the way you would have to? you know but I guess one advice might be a bit cliche, would be to try to pay less attention to what you think that society wants you to do. That's definitely a journey that over the last years for me was recognizing that in different situations I might pay attention too much to sort of external either approval or expectations from others, and I find that we have our own journey, and it's hard sometimes to do our own path, but it's an important one for you to follow your beliefs. So that is getting involved, that is opening up, being vulnerable. I think a lot of that is so important to get your mind early on, and that shapes you to be a more fulfilled person.
Wow. So far, we didn't get any, repeated answer yet, so which is
Yeah, yeah.
awesome.
No, very mature answer from a
Yeah,
very mature young man.
yeah.
Old man, mature old man now.
Old man.
All right. I mean, that's it. That's pretty much it. Thanks, Felipe, for coming on.
Yeah,
Having a
thanks
chat
guys
with
for
us.
having. That was a fun one.
I mean, this is, it's almost like the app, really. It's like your app could be like a podcast for yourself, a podcast for one.
Yeah.
Because okay, so the three people we've spoken to, all alumni, and most of them I've known for more than 8 years, about the same, right? Like Sophie and Jeremy,
Mhm.
Mustafa. And each time there's been something, at least one or two things that they've probably revealed on this show that I never even asked or never even thought about asking, or maybe never had a chance to have that conversation. So it's been good for us to have these talks in this format. I think it's definitely it's definitely going to be a different like sense of each other, right? I mean, not so for me because I'm not the one being asked the questions, but I definitely for I think for me getting to know you and Nick getting to know you, it's been good, and with others as well. So
Yeah.
as long as you know people, sometimes a different format, a different flavor builds a different connection. So
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a good initiative. I think it will help people, hopefully new people coming in into the crew, existing ones, as you said, sort of even connection with alumni, and hopefully even a wider exposure.
Yeah.
yeah.
Also, a subtle reason why we do this is for Scarapo to talk to his friends.
They all just happen to be on our guest list. So
Right. Thank you so much, Felipe. Thank you for taking your time to spend here with us. And know it's getting really late in Portugal right now. And I hope you have a wonderful night. I hope the dog barking wouldn't disturb your sleep. And last but not least, I hope I get a chance to meet you in person and talk to you about all these things soon. Who knows?
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, guys.
thanks, buddy. Happy New Year too. If we don't catch you
Yeah.
after that.
Happy New Year.
All right.
2021 for a better year.
For sure. All right. Thanks, Felipe. I'll chat with you later, man.
Thank you. Yeah.
Bye, Felipe.
This podcast is a project created by her 18 Pacific Coast Scout Group, where we created awesome leadership and management training program for 18 to 26 years old. If you want to learn more about us, check out our website and social media accounts, link in description.